Welcome back to our Runners Focus series, and in this episode we're going to be looking at working with a runner that's come in with complaints of they describe it as a tight description of their Achilles and their calf muscle. And we are going to look at some techniques that might help to mobilize that tissue and that sensation. As a disclaimer, in this episode, we have obviously gone through a much thorough assessment in terms of medical history and intake and ruled out any red flags. In this episode, though, we're just going to purely look at some techniques that you can take right away to help with that mobility of the tissue. However, with Paul as well, what we're going to look at though as well is while a client will complain or report tightness in their calf complex, we also need to look above and below the site of what they're reporting as well. So initially, we're going to look at some foundational techniques such as Effleurage and Petrissage, and then we're going to incorporate some METs, some muscle energy techniques into this as well. So initially, I want to take a look at what Paul's movement looks like in his tissue and how he feels and what range he might have, but these are going to be bed-based assessments here. So from this point here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask Paul to actively take his toes towards his shin to see how that feels and then relax. And then I'm going to do the same thing again by bending the knee and isolating the soleus as much as I possibly can. From here, can you just actively take your toes towards your shin for me? That's it. Good. And let that go. Beautiful. And then for me, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to ask him to do it passively. I'll take it. There we go. And nice and heavy. And then again, taking that leg into dorsiflexion. Right. Perfect. I'm going to start with a few compressions in the area just to allow me to palpate and to see how that tissue feels. And then once I've gained what I'm going to do, I'm just going to dive straight into doing some Effleurage. So from here, I'm using an assisted hand and a broad technique of Effleurage to cover the calf, assessing the quality of the tissue and its mobility, and then I'll take it up to the hamstrings as well. And then I might then dive into a little bit of Petrissage while I'm here, and that's more of a technique that's going to help lift the tissue as well and create a little bit of space in that tissue. It's a really, really lovely technique, and I'll take it up to the hamstrings as well. Okay. Then the next technique that I might look at from here is actually then looking at some slightly deeper work. So I'm going to look at some assisted thumb work. So now once you've prepared the area and from your palpation and your assessment, for me, for Paul here, it's this lateral line that feels that it has a little bit more decreased mobility in that area. So anything that you do that is deeper and more specific, you're going to go much slower. You're going to allow that tissue to let you in. So general rule of thumb, no pun intended, is you use techniques that are general, specific back to general, and it's superficial, deep to superficial. I'm always going to then make sure that I ask my client, Paul, how does that feel? Depth-wise, is it okay? And really take my time. Good. And then follow that back up with a more general technique again. One of the biggest things also I always find is that while a client will come in and report a certain issue, so again, we're going to use the example of a calf and an Achilles that feel restrictive for Paul, and is that we don't necessarily just focus on the site of pain or issue that they're reporting, that we look globally as well to make sure that we're addressing that full chain. So the next technique that I'm going to look at here then is actually now a muscle energy technique. So I'll run you through this next bit. So with Paul, I found that the gastrocnemius was slightly more restrictive than the soleus. So it was in this position here. Obviously, if we bend his knee, we're biasing the soleus more when we're asking his ankle to go into dorsiflexion. So from here, Paul, all I'm gonna get you to do is to gently just push your foot into my leg ever so slightly, just enough to fire up that muscle here. That's it, good. So when I ask you to, that's exactly what you're gonna do. So it's just a sustained contraction. And we're gonna hold it for 10 seconds and go through the sequence a few times. We're gonna use a muscle energy technique, post-isometric relaxation in this next bit here. And from here, Paul, right, so I'm going to find what I would call his first barrier. So purpose of here, so we're going to go nice and heavy with your foot. That's it. Let go here. Don't do anything for me. There we go. That's it. And from here, gently, Paul, just push your foot ever so slightly into my leg. That's it. And we're going to hold that for just about 10 seconds or so. And then all you're going to start to do now is just now fully let that contraction go. Just let that leg be super heavy, and I'm going to wait for him to fully relax until I now take it into what I would call the next barrier. And it's a very subtle movement. And I'm keeping my hand on his calf just to make sure that he's fully relaxed and he's not engaging, but also that I can tell when he is engaging it again. That's great. And I'm going to stay in this new barrier for 10 seconds. And then from here, I'm going to ask him to do the same thing again. So gently just push your foot into me. That's it. So I'm asking him to go into plantar flexion, which is obviously then sending the gastroc and the soleus as well into an isometric contraction. We're going to hold that for 10 seconds. And then once that 10 seconds is up, again, Paul, let that go and be nice and heavy. And then as soon as that client has fully let go of that contraction, I'm going to move him again to the next barrier. And once I'm there, I'm going to hang out again for another 10 seconds. Good, last time, I'm gonna push in, hold it, that's it. Good, and then let that go. And I'm gonna take it a little bit further this time. And the last barrier, I'm gonna hold it here now for a good 20 seconds or so. And we'll go back to what we did at the beginning of this. And that's just to retest his range of motion in that area. And also at the same time, what we didn't demonstrate at the beginning of this video, it was also ask Paul how it felt when I took that leg or his ankle through range as well. How did it feel on the calf as well? Good, let that go for me. Nice and heavy, beautiful. So from here, all I wanna do now is I'm just gonna retest this foot. So can you take your toes towards your shin for me, Paul? Lovely, good, and then nice and heavy. Let me do the movement for you this time now. And for me, the fluidity of that movement is much better. There's more ease. I would also look visually at how that range of motion is looking. And I would also ask the client, how did that feel for them as well?